Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video with Rishi Sunak once again threatening a very late general election, and with me starting to wonder if he might be serious, I'd like to consider whether Tory MPs would actually allow him to do so, given that it would hugely increase the odds of the Conservative Party itself suffering a much harsher result. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So we still cannot really know what Sunak is trying to achieve. But for anyone who thinks he just wants to trouser as much cash as possible before leaving the country, there isn't really much evidence to argue against it. So if we work on the basis that this is a possibility, it means two things. First of all, that Sunak wants his time in government to last as long as possible in order to extract maximum value for particularly his wife's business interests. This means that if he can get away with it, we can't rule out January 2025 for the election, even though that would be madness for the Conservative Party. Second, that Sunak really doesn't care about the scale of the losses the party will suffer. I've said many times that once the Tories realise they're going to lose, the strategy would have to change to picking a time when they'd limit their losses. But if Sunak had wanted to adopt that strategy, he would have spent the first half of this year getting some easy wins, and there were easy wins to be had, and then go to the polls this autumn. He hasn't. This means he's taken the brunt of all the Tory chickens coming home to roost in 2023 without any achievements to counter it. The result is that Labour have maintained their huge gap in voting intention polls, and Sunak's personal approval rating has nosedived. It's now where Boris Johnson's approval rating was at the end, although still some way to sink before it hits Johnson's worst ratings. It seems madness to me that Tory MPs would allow Sunak to carry on doing nothing to attract voters, but just boosting his household income, especially if it means costing them even more seats by delaying the election for longer than would be wise. Now, to my mind, there are only two reasons that they would. First, because they delude themselves that something will turn up next year to boost their fortunes. No, it won't. All I see on the horizon next year are more things to sink them. The best news Sunak can get for next year is that the EU agreed to extend grace periods on electric vehicle rules of origin. But that wouldn't be a boost, just the absence of another economic body blow that's coming. But I cannot rule out the fact that Tory MPs are simply deluding themselves about the state of the country next year. The second possibility is that Tory MPs will see that Sunak is leading them to ruin, but just as with Johnson for about half a year, feel powerless to do anything because their only option is to bring him down, but who with? Not only would a fourth leader inside the same parliament really irritate the public, but there is nobody credible who actually has a plan to achieve anything. They are hanging on to this notion that the party could ride the coattails of Sunak's relative popularity, but his popularity is sinking and the party's popularity is not rising. At the current rate, it's going to be below that of the wider party by next summer. And part of the problem, I think, is that Tory MPs never really understood why Sunak was popular in the first place. Let's cover this idea of Sunak being relatively popular compared to his party and how the party has brought his popularity down rather than him bringing the parties up, because it was always rubbish. Sunak was mostly popular because of one thing: furlough. A policy he did not come up with and which he went along with begrudgingly, as evidenced by the fact that out of sheer spite, he left 3 million self-employed people without a penny at the time. As furlough was pretty much the only thing that the government did, which largely worked as intended in 2020, Sunak was cock of the walk. The public not only appreciated it, but saw him as someone who gets things done when all they saw from the rest of the government was failure and excuses. As for the economic drop-off, obviously no one's going to blame a new chancellor during the main thrust of COVID. His popularity waned over time because he didn't actually do anything afterwards. Furlough came and went, and it's like, so what's he going to do next? Oh, nothing? Okay, then. That should have been a warning to Tory MPs. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they made a mistake in picking him. They couldn't seriously keep Johnson. If Liz Truss was the alternative, of course they had to back Sunak. But they should have done so with eyes wide open. Dan Hodges, who's the Tory shill in the Mail on Sunday this weekend, described Sunak as delivery driven. You what? What's he delivered? Ironically, the only things he's actually delivered are in the forms of softening Brexit. The Windsor Framework, rejoining Horizon, Copernicus. These are the only things he's delivered. And all of these are just slightly, and I mean slightly, reversing some of the damage of the Brexit he campaigned for. It's not delivery in terms of making things better than they were at the last election, because that's the sort of thing you need to win the following one. You have to be able to say to the voters, things are better than at the last election, aren't they? No, they're not. Even these achievements all represent backward steps compared with where we were in December 2019. What has he delivered on the economy? Nothing. Inflation is falling more slowly than expected, and Sunak hasn't pursued any policies designed to bring inflation down anyway. Although Sunak has done some genuinely good work on ending the acrimonious policies of Boris Johnson and David Frost regarding the deal they negotiated and signed, it hasn't led to anything yet that voters will see as improving their lives now. It just prevents us suffering further. But the public don't notice when you do something to stop them suffering further. They only notice when you do something to make things better. What has he delivered where he can point to something tangible as an improvement voters can feel? People know that their living standards are falling. The NHS is struggling worse than ever. Because the strikes are continuing, that is just going to be worse next year. The Tories no longer have a viable strategy in blaming others. The public have decided that 13 years, actually, do you know what? That is enough time to see some improvements, not more excuses. It seems to me that if Sunak does just want to boost the family coffers, and it is an if, I don't know this, but if he does, and he's not serious about winning the election, although I do think he's not serious about winning the election, then we have an interesting extreme of possibilities. The first is that Tory MPs see the writing on the wall. They understand that actually things are just going to get worse. They understand that fighting an election any later than, say, next July would be madness and force Sunak to call the election next summer. Or second, continue to act like rabbits trapped in headlights, focusing on their own factional battles, go to the polls late 2024, or maybe even later, and actually realise the nightmare scenario that the polls sometimes suggest could be possible for them. You know, the Tories being beaten down to about 200 seats, as Labour were in 2019, that seems priced in right now. Being knocked down to 150, that is very much on the cards if they don't pick up or they don't pick a good time for the election. But it is also entirely possible to be reduced to just 100 seats if they continue to fail to deliver and they insist on picking the worst possible time for the election. Consider that if the election is late 2024, Rishi Sunak will have been Prime Minister for 2 full years. Isaac Levidow, who's the party's election strategist, has said that Sunak will present himself as the Prime Minister of Change. This is desperate stuff from a man who actually knows his job. Sunak has been PM for about a year now and hasn't changed anything, other than the government's Brexit position a little, and even that change is less than Labour are promising. Now, Levidow did try this strategy in 2019 more successfully with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson had only just become Prime Minister 6 months earlier, and he was a leader of a minority government, so everyone understood he couldn't get things through Parliament. If we have an election late 2024, Sunak isn't going to deliver anything. He'll have been the Prime Minister, he's been the Prime Minister for about a year now. He'll have been a Prime Minister for like 2 years by then, with a large majority, so can absolutely get things done. It just seems a madness to try and present him as the Prime Minister of Change. You know, he's not achieved anything. He's not done anything. What little he has achieved, in terms of Brexit positioning, is still less than Labour are suggesting he needs to do. If they wait another full year for the election, it'll be another year of stagnation. Sunak's not delivering anything. To actually deliver anything with short-term benefits, he needs to knock heads together in his party to get it through. But he's too weak. This is the man who refused to go anywhere near Parliament when his MPs were debating the Privileges Committee report into Boris Johnson and the subsequent fallout from the behaviour of his cultists later. Yet, he was happy to attack members of the public waving EU flags at the last night at the proms. The man is as craven as they come. He's simply not capable of delivering anything because he's not capable of knocking heads together. I'm not even sure he's all that bothered about doing so. I am confident that the longer the Tories leave the election next year, the worse it will get for them. There's no boost coming. Their best hopes are that things get worse more slowly. But the longer they wait, the more people get hit with higher mortgage and rent payments, the more chance there is of a public building collapsing, maybe even causing serious injury. The impact of rules of origin on the car industry, that is a huge unknown right now. We might dodge that bullet, we might not. More councillors are going to be in financial trouble next year. And what? For what? Inflation will be lower, but it will be still high. What's going to come? What's going to counter all that? Nothing. Whenever you look at any policy area, you just see things getting worse, and the public know exactly who is to blame this time. Well, enough of them do anyway. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.